皆様大変お待たせいたしました。本日の最後のスピーカーさんで、こちらはですね、愛坂春日様です。日本人カトリック系イラストレーターアーティスト、東京在住の方です。愛坂春日さんは東京を拠点に活動する現代日本のカトリック系イラストレーター兼アーティストです。モエマリアプロジェクトで広く知られており、イエズス・キリストや聖母マリアといった伝統的なキリスト教の図像を日本のアニメや漫画の現代的な萌え美学を用いて再解釈しています。愛坂さんの芸術と信仰に対する独自のアプローチは大きな注目を集めています。彼と彼の作品に関する主な情報は次の通りです。芸術的ビジョン、愛坂さんは、日本の文化に共鳴する形でカトリック信仰を分かち合うということを目指しております。日本のポップカルチャーの象徴的な視覚言語と宗教的なテーマを融合させることで、親しみやすく温かみのある聖人たちの姿を書き出しています。コンベンションでの成功、世界最大のファンコミックコンベンションであるコミケ、東京ビッグサイトで行われた作品を展示し、完売されたことで世界的な注目を集めました。執筆活動とプロジェクト、イラスト制作と並行して愛坂サブストックを通じてご自身の創作活動や信仰に関する考察を記録しています。社会貢献活動、彼独自の伝道的なアプローチは国際的な宗教・文化メディアで取り上げられ、日本の漫画文化とカトリック信仰を結びつける彼の活動が注目されています。では、ニールさん、よろしくお願いします。
Okay, so Haruhi Aisaku is a contemporary Japanese Catholic illustrator and artist based in Tokyo. He is widely recognized for his Moe Maria project, which reimagines traditional Christian religious iconography, such as Jesus Christ with the Virgin Mary, using the modern Moe aesthetic of Japanese anime and manga. Aisaka's unique approach to art and faith has generated significant attention. Key details about him and his work include his artistic vision, which is Aisaka seeks to share his Catholic faith in a way that resonates with Japanese culture by blending the iconic visual language of Japanese pop culture with religious themes. He creates approachable, tender representations of the saints. Convention success. He gained global virality after showcasing and selling out his artwork at Comiket, Tokyo Big Sight, the world's largest fan and comic convention. Writing and projects. Alongside his illustration work, he documents his creative journey and reflections on faith through his Isaka's Substack. And finally, public engagement. His unique evangelistic approach has been featured in international religious and cultural media, highlighting how he bridges the Japanese manga culture with the Catholic faith. So there we go. Welcome, Haruhi-san. Thank you so much for making time to be with us, especially at short notice. And we hope you can share with us your wonderful work and also the background and idea behind how you got there.
Thank you so much for having me, Neil, and thank you so much for the introductions from both you, Neil, and also Hiro-san ですね。
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I see. Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, thank you so much for the introductions. My name is Haruhi Aisaka, and yeah, I've been drawing anime Virgin Mary for like about the past 2 years. And so I was graciously invited by Neil to present at the Fourth Marian Conference. And I was asked to kind of explain why I draw the anime Virgin Mary. So I will just get right onto it.
Thank you.
So really quickly, I want to kind of just reintroduce myself. Who is Haruhi Aisaka? So I am a lay Catholic. I was actually an agnostic for most of my life. And then I became an evangelical Protestant while I was going to university in America. And I've been an evangelical Protestant for about 5 years or so, and then I came back to Japan. And when I came back to Japan, eventually became a Roman Catholic. I'm currently living in Japan right now, but I lived in America for a very long time, which is why my English is better than my Japanese. That is something I'm trying to work on. But yeah, there's just a reason why I'm presenting in English right now. And I'm currently in my mid-20s. And what I do now is that I draw the Virgin Mary as a cute anime girl. I'm still trying to learn right now. This is like a snapshot of the illustrations that I made ever since I started in 2024. Um, I feel like I have gotten better. I don't know about you guys, but I yeah, this is kind of just a brief summary of like the work. I still have plenty of other things that you could see in my Instagram or Twitter. And like stated before, I had the honor of being able to sell my art and my merchandise at both Comitia, which is a more of a smaller convention, and also a comic market. And this is a picture from Comic Market. Basically, if you guys don't know, it's like the largest and biggest anime manga convention in the world. And essentially, a bunch of artists, come together and they kind of get together to sell their art to other people. Each person is given basically half a table to set up their stall, and they're able to sell whatever they want to sell. And so I was part of the like I think thousands of other artists that were able to sell at that convention. And I just wanted to finally say that I really don't have any clue of what I'm doing, and I wanted to say this because I know I'm presenting alongside, actual priests and, people with PhDs and, people that have, probably studied more than I have been alive. And so I do wanted to say that I've only really been a Catholic for 2 years, an illustrator for 2 years. I've only been selling merch for about 6 months, and so um since I was invited to the conference, I will share my ideas very clearly, but please take everything with a grain of salt. And if I get something wrong, please correct me and please forgive me.
Don't worry.
Thank you, Neil. So, I wanted to get into it. Why do I draw the Virgin Mary as a cute anime girl? A lot of people, when they respond to that question, they'll say something like, "It's to appeal to younger audiences, right?" I get this comment all the time that my art is going to really appeal to younger audiences, and comments similar to that nature. And although this is something that I do take into consideration, it really isn't the main goal that I have with my art. Whenever I kind of hear this sort of comments, it might be, I kind of think about this meme where you have a guy that clearly like doesn't really belong, trying to appeal to like a bunch of youngsters or to a bunch of people that he's, not really kind of really a part of. And so, and I guess the thing I will say is that young people in general, especially Gen Z, which is I'm part of like the late part of Generation Z. If there's one thing that Generation Z truly values, it's authenticity. It's being yourself, regardless of, who you are, or how right you are. It's to be truthful to yourself. And so whenever I make my art, I don't really think in terms of will this art resonate with X group of people. Instead, I kind of think to myself, does this art honor God?
Mm.
That's honestly, and it is a bit sanctimonious to say this, but I do genuinely think in terms of that. Whenever I illustrate the Virgin Mary, I try to think of the most important thing is, does the art that I make honor God in some way? In order to ask that question, we have to also ask the question, what's the purpose of sacred art in general? The Catechism of the Catholic Church has a small but really succinct section on sacred art, which I will iterate right now. Sacred art is true and beautiful when its form corresponds to its particular vocation, invoking and glorifying in faith and adoration the transcendent mystery of God. The Catechism then continues. This spiritual beauty of God is reflected in the Most Holy Virgin, Mother of God, the angels, and saints. Genuine sacred art draws man to adoration, to prayer, and to the love of God, Creator and Savior, Holy One, and Sanctifier. And so, if I were to kind of put this in my own words, I would say the purpose of sacred art is to glorify God and to lead people to God. You know, I think that's kind of the reason why, art was so valued, throughout the history of the church. It's because with art, we kind of have this ability to connect with God in the way that words can't. We have an ability to really see God, to, in a sense, feel God, to touch God, and to really be in God's presence through sacred art. Which is why we have such a rich history of, depicting Christ and depicting Mary and all the saints for the past 2,000 years. We find something truly special in the visual arts. And so, with that question answered, we have to move on to the next question. Can the anime style produce genuine sacred art? I'm drawing animated Virgin Mary, so we have to ask, well, does this particular style, does it have the potential to even generate genuine sacred art? This is a collage of like, some of my favorite illustrators that, Rella, Mordecai, and Sejup. These are all like, depictions of famous anime characters. The middle one is an original creation. But I guess the thing I want to like take away from this is that I find these illustrations to be particularly beautiful. You know, I just, look at it and see just how beautiful, how much effort they really put into this work and, just how I just really love looking at these. I really do think that in a sense, you know, they they kind of express something that's truly beautiful, even though it is of like this anime moe style. And so when I look at these, I kind of think to myself, what if the Virgin Mary was depicted in a similar fashion? I kind of yearn for that and like sort of wish for that, which is sort of the reason, or the initial reason why I sort of started drawing the Virgin Mary as an anime girl. So I guess you could answer this question of why I draw the Virgin Mary as an anime girl with like this statement. I draw the Virgin Mary as an anime girl because anime is beautiful and has the potential to produce genuine sacred art. And while I think this is a good answer, it's not really the full answer that I really would like to say. And the reason why it's not the full answer is because, well, we already have beautiful sacred art. We already have the Sistine Chapel. We already have Pieta. We already have, the glorious icons of the East. We have Hagia Sophia. We have Notre Dame. We have Our Lady of Guadalupe, right? We have all this, beautiful, authentic, holy, sacred art that's all over the world. Why do we need to deviate from that? Why do we need to produce something new when what we already have is already so beautiful? This actually is a comment that I get, from time to time. It's like, yeah, it's nice, but there's not really much of a purpose to it. Why, deviate when we already have something that's already established? Why not just follow what we already have? Um, in order to answer that question, I want to go back to a time in history. Here are two illustrations, or these are two art pieces depicting the same event, the Annunciation. On the left is a Byzantine icon. I don't actually know who drew that. I was on Wikipedia and there wasn't a author attributed to it. And on the right is a more Renaissance Baroque piece of sacred art. During this time, this was like the time of the Renaissance. It was a period of time in Western Europe where people were rediscovering art, literature, and sculpture and philosophy of the ancient Greeks and Romans that was sort of lost during the medieval ages after the fall of the Roman Empire. And during this period of time, since people were rediscovering or trying to recreate this sort of, Greco-Roman world, the masters of the Renaissance diverged significantly from what was already established sacred art. I mean, if you just look at these two different pieces of art, you could just see clearly like how different these two pieces are, despite both of them um conveying, the same event. And what I wanted to get into this is I'm gonna just really quickly to kind of analyze like these two pieces of art to the best of my knowledge and understanding. When it comes to Byzantine iconography, there's generally a lack of naturalism, a sort of flatness, and a lack of natural perspective. Everything kind of just seems very flat. And also, the backgrounds are fully gold. The faces are, stylized and depicted in this sort of like, solemn yet, really, really beautiful and ethereal way. And the reason why the artists depicted this iconography in this way, it all serves a purpose. It serves a purpose of letting the viewer look into heaven through a window. The reason why, like, it's, arguably somewhat unnatural, the depictions of, the Blessed Virgin Mary, the angels, and of God, is because heaven is not meant to be like this world. It's supposed to be something that's, greater, grander, and, better. And so the artists of that age wanted to emphasize this by kind of distortion, by kind of, distorting, or I guess, distorting may be a little bit of a bad word, maybe like, altering what we see in real life so that the viewer could essentially kind of be transported into another world. They could be transported and see, heaven, see something that's, timeless and ethereal. In comparison with, Renaissance art, it's kind of the complete opposite. How do you say this? Um, Renaissance art cares deeply about depicting the real world, admittedly in a sort of stylistic way, but depicting the real world in the most beautiful way possible. Like the people that are depicted there, there's a sort of depth. They care deeply about human anatomy and accurately depicting human anatomy. There's a use of dramatic lighting in other, not particularly in this one, but in other Renaissance artworks. There is the use of 1 point and 2 point perspective in order to give the painting a sort of depth that you don't see in Byzantine iconography. And all of this, in a sense, serves a bit of a different purpose. While Byzantine iconography takes you into heaven, Renaissance sacred art takes you into a specific point in salvation history. I believe that the Renaissance masters wanted to do was to take the viewer and place them into a specific time in salvation history, particularly the Annunciation in this example, um, and show how much of a beautiful and sacred event that actually happened on this earth. You know, and I think that's kind of like, the biggest reason, the biggest difference between Byzantine iconography and Renaissance art. And the reason why I kind of wanted to explain this, it's a bit of a long-winded explanation. The reason why I wanted to explain this is because I believe that different styles of art help communicate different aspects of God. One style of art isn't superior to the other, at least in my opinion. Rather, the different styles of sacred art, help communicate different aspects of the same truth. One emphasizes the glories of heaven, the ethereal, timeless, and beautiful nature of heaven, while the other form of sacred art glorifies, God's creation. It glorifies the human body. It just shows how beautiful God's creation truly is and how beautiful it is that God actually came down on earth and interacted with the real world. And so, with that being said, we have to ask the question, can this new style of art that's taking over the world right now, this anime manga style, help communicate a different aspect of God that we were unable to do or were limited in doing so with the styles of art in the past? And I think this is an important question because if the answer is no, then there's really not a purpose in creating, anime Virgin Mary other than to just like appeal or to follow a trend. I believe this is an important question because it really gives a reason as to why we personally as Catholics would want to depict, and use this modern style of art. Well, the answer to that, in my opinion, is yes. I believe that it can depict, communicate something about God that these other styles of arts are, I wouldn't say struggle, but um, might not be as well able to do. And I want to provide like a few examples of this. This is a old illustration that I have. I think I drew this like a year ago. And so there's actually probably quite a bit that would probably change if I were to redraw this. But the reason why I chose this illustration is because I want to like you people I want to refer people to the tiny crown that's on top of Mary's head. I really love drawing the crown of the Virgin Mary as like tiny as possible in a sort of like kind of a ridiculous fashion to a certain degree. And partially the reason why I do that is because it looks adorable. But the other reason why is because I wanted to communicate Mary's humility. She is the Queen of Heaven. She is, this majestic, creature, the most beautiful and glorious creature that God ever created. Yet she's glorious precisely because she's a lover of poverty. She's a lover of humility. She was the most humble servant of God. And so I really do like depicting, the crown in like this, or drawing the crown like this, in order to emphasize that, to symbolize her majesty, but it's a majesty that's humble, that's, that triumphs in humility. Now, if I were to use like a real, oh no, not real, I guess yeah. If I were to use like a more realistic depiction of Mary, and shrunken the crown, I kind of half the size of the crown from the original image, it just doesn't really look right. It just doesn't really fit the specific art style. With like the anime art style, with like the giant eyes and like the really simplified, features and like the permanent, blush on the cheeks, the characters are in general kind of it kind of, infantilizes them. It kind of makes the characters look more childish, in a good way when it comes to anime, when it comes to the anime style. And so a tiny crown on the top, it kind of fits the whole style of the art. Whereas with this, with like, the realistic adult looking face with the tiny crown just doesn't really look right. Another example with like anime is red eyes. I really love anime characters with red eyes. These are a few examples. And of course, red eyes don't actually occur in nature. I think they actually do occur in nature. It's some sort of genetic disease or something wrong with the person if they have actual red eyes. But what I'm trying to say is that, with the anime style, you could depict characters with red eyes, and it doesn't look that off. It doesn't look, too abnormal. It actually kind of, adds to the charm of the character. And so I sort of used this in order to depict Saint Mary Magdalene. This is actually my newest piece that I've made. I think it's like, actually like, 5 days ago. And when I depict Saint Mary Magdalene, um, I wanted to sort of symbolize her story, and part of her story is that she was possessed by demons. I think it was in like Luke chapter 7 where it talks about a woman who was possessed by like seven demons, and that was Saint Mary Magdalene. It may have been chapter 8 actually. I'm not entirely sure, but I wanted to emphasize that part of Saint Mary Magdalene's life. And so I thought to myself, well, maybe I should depict her with red eyes. I kind of thought to myself, well, if God can make, good out of evil, then maybe when the devil left her, the devil left her with beautiful red eyes, and as a way to testify to, God's glory and goodness. And so yeah, I guess that's one of the reasons why I depicted her with red eyes. And it's something that obviously you can't really do with other forms of other styles of art. So, and this is kind of like how I sort of approach my art whenever I'm trying to depict the saints, depict the Virgin Mary, and to produce the art that I make. I really think to myself, how can I use like the unique aspects about this anime style to glorify God and the saints. What can I use that, anime excels at that other things may not excel at in order to glorify God? And this is kind of an approach that I always try to keep in mind whenever I create my art. Um, and I try to be as creative as possible in that. In other words, I don't want to just, take already existing sacred art and just like throw a coat of anime paint on top of it. I want to try to be as creative, as, unique as possible in my depictions while still staying in line with the church's tradition and with, the tradition that's invoked in sacred scripture. And so if I were to conclude everything, I truly believe that anime can glorify God and edify the church in a unique way, which is why I'm pursuing this, which is why I love depicting anime Virgin Mary.
Yeah,
So yeah, if that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, yes, feel free to ask. And
great.
if you want to follow me on Instagram or Twitter, you just have to look up Haruhi Aisaka. And I don't have merch. This is a bit of a promotion, but I also do sell like my art. And so if you look up Moe Maria, you could find my online store there if you want to support me. So yeah, regardless, thank you so much everyone for listening to my presentation.
Thank you so much, Haruhi-san. That's fantastic. And
あ
of
りが
course,
とうご
we will
ざい
take
ます。
your Substack and a link, and we'll put it on my own social media and other forums to spread the gospels, as it were.
Yeah, thank you so much, Neil.
素晴らしい。
Yeah, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. And it's very interesting in that you were saying that, or at least it reminded me of the idea that art can talk to people in ways that, speech can't do. So that being in Japan in terms of evangelization, of course, anime is huge in Japan, and of course, Japan is famous for across the world. So this is a way, of course, would you say, of being able to communicate through art in the culture of Japan because it's a very iconic, it's a very core central part of Japanese culture, and that's also one of the great abilities of this form of art is that it can be a great communicator of spreading the good news. Would you say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't even like recall how many times I've shown my art to like, Japanese people, and they just kind of said, "Oh, she looks so cute," like the Virgin Mary looks like so cute, like kawaii and stuff like that. And so, it's kind of, I sort of find it so endearing because, calling the Virgin Mary cute, it's something you'll probably never hear in like a Christian country.
Yeah,
But like in Japan, it's like, because, people aren't really Christian and it's all very new to them, they kind of just see a beautiful anime girl and that's like the natural thing to say. Um,
yeah,
I mean, yeah, and yeah, like I want to like, clarify. Yes, I do believe that evangelization is important. And, in the sense, like, part of the reason why I make this art is to evangelize to people. But I think that like evangelize, I guess this is my personal opinion, but I think the most effective evangelization is authenticity. The most effective way to evangelize to people is to simply live the Christian life and to express the beauty of Christianity. We have the most beautiful religion in the world. The gospel is the most beautiful story in the world, and we should have confidence in that. And regardless of how we express, the message of the gospel in whatever medium or whatever, vocation that we do, we should prioritize our confidence in that. Which is why I kind of, said in the beginning of the presentation, I don't really try to appeal. I try instead to appeal to God, if that's the one person I want to appeal to.
it's very refreshing to hear you say this, Harry-san. That we have a beautiful faith with the gospel, and then the faith through the works of people down the centuries has produced beautiful works. You mentioned the Sistine Chapel and the Gothic cathedrals of Europe, etc., and across the world. And of course, anime, it's the way you said, how can this be used to glorify God, this form of art? And that it's great because you're not basing your happiness on how to please people, but actually how God can be reflected through your art. It's a very, I think that's how artists throughout the centuries perhaps have taken. I think that, in my opinion, I think they've taken the same type of take that they want to glorify God through their work. Would you say?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Um, well, I mean, I do think that, I guess like, when I say like, I do my art to glorify God, like I said that, it was a bit sanctimonious to say because, it's always difficult to focus on God purely. Like I always fall into like temptations, like, I look at the likes, the amount of likes I receive and I worry about that and, the sales that I get and I worry about that too. So, I'm not
That
immune to
just
that,
means that you're
obviously.
human, Harry. You're human like all of us. So,
Yeah, yeah,
you
I'm not
know,
immune to that, obviously, and I also think that even though I do say that like the priority is to appeal to God, part of appealing to God is to produce the best possible work,
mm,
and part of producing the best possible work is to take inspiration from other people who have already been successful. And so, in that sense, I do think that it's important to be aware of trends or to be aware of certain things that are popular. But yeah, I mean, I do believe that, when it comes to the artists that have existed, all throughout the history of the church, I think the best sacred art is for people that primarily cared about glorifying God and
yeah,
to express what they see in God.
yeah,
And I could kind of go on. I mean, I'm not an expert by any means, but I could kind of go on and on and on about, the different Renaissance artists and, how the subtle differences between them and, how they all kind of come together to glorify God in unique ways. And so,
yeah.
yeah, I do kind of think that it's kind of, yeah, they sort of really did glorify God in their own unique ways.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there while you were speaking about how our Blessed Mother can look cute, and I'm reminded of what Jesus has said, like, unless you are as little children, you cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. So, that exact scripture I was reminded of as you spoke. So, there's actually a theological, maybe by accident, I'm not sure, but there's a theological richness there too that can be um, leveraged, or it can be adopted into or related to your work because there's an innocence that Christ told everyone around him in his day that that is actually a very valuable gift to have, like as against pride and so on. So, and you mentioned the humility of our Blessed Mother, so it ties in very strongly, I think, with an important point that Christ made about being as innocent as little children, you know?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned that verse. It is actually a verse that really resonates with me when I make my art. Um, you know, I think what's really beautiful about Christianity is that, it really emphasizes God's humility. He came down to us. He became a human being. And I guess the reason why I really love depicting, Mary with baby Jesus is because it really shows the beauty of the incarnation. You know, it's unbelievable to think that, God actually became like a defenseless baby, that,
Mm,
God had to be nursed by his mother, that God had to, like his diaper had to be changed and like all these like really, really, things that, babies normally do.
yeah,
That's something that God also did. And also, of course, the most humble thing was, dying on the cross, obviously. And it kind of just shows to me that, even though they were so, they were in a sense, like the Mary was just the mother, right? And even though she was so ordinary in that sense, right? She really did change the world. She really did, brought the salvation of the entire world. Even though Jesus was like a tiny defenseless baby, he, he conquered death. He completely, he's the king of the entire world.
yeah,
And I think that's something that's particularly beautiful. And it's something that I kind of try to express through my art, that despite the fact that they look so innocent and, defenseless, they are truly, strong. They are truly powerful. They're
mm,
truly, people that can, how do you say it, like through their faith in God, they truly did make the world a better place, and they truly brought about the salvation of the entire world.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think about, yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. I mean, Our Lady accepted God's request that she become the mother of Jesus, and that wasn't easy. She embraced all of that, and then to be told that, she had the seven sorrows of the heart because going forward, she knew what was going to happen to Christ. So you're right, very brave, very strong, although at the same time very innocent and very, very humble. Maybe they're the great characteristics of our faith, to have humility and embrace difficulty despite Christ himself shed much of his divine glory when he became man, and that was a very big act of humility, of course, as you mentioned. So you're right, and I think those type of concepts that you're taking from the gospel are excellent in terms of infusing into the ideas into the animation art. It's really wonderful to hear. There's a Father Stefano, and someday I hope to meet with him. But he's very he's the president of PAMI, which is the Pontifical International Maritime Academy in Rome, and he's very interested in this word enculturation, which basically is to, when evangelization is necessary to have a knowledge of the culture of the country that you're in, and not to pre-propose or presuppose that coming from another country or coming from a different background that this way is the only way, but it's necessary to be able to adapt. And I think it's very rich and interesting that you've identified an anime and are very good at it. I mean, I think you've just started in terms of the time frame, but I think all of your approach, the questions you bring to the table with this art and with your ideas is very, very advanced.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I just, I guess it just came about. I mean, I'm not, I don't, I still have a lot to learn. I wanted to actually like really comment on the interculturation part actually, just
Okay,
really
great.
quickly.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, just really comment on it really quickly. I think, obviously, it is really good to, understand the culture in which you're evangelizing to. And of course, that's very important. But I will, of course, I'm sorry, I said of course like 15 times. But I want to add to that I think it's also important to recognize that, cultures that aren't Christian can give something back to the church. And I think that's something that's really important because, you know, uh, I think part of the reason why a lot of Japanese people in general, or not in general, but like, why so many people aren't Christian and why there is, in a sense, this antagonism towards Christianity that exists in Japan. It's not really widespread, obviously, but it does exist. Is because they see Christianity as this sort of like foreign force that's just trying to change Japan for itself, for like their own selfish or, their own selfish reasons. And I think part of what I'm trying to do is to kind of say that, Japanese culture, even though it's really not a Christian culture, it can give something back to the church. And I think that's something that's very important. No one likes to just be dominated. No one likes to be like, conquered in the sense of like, something is imposed on them and that's it, they don't actually, give anything back,
Right.
but rather what's beautiful about Catholicism is that in almost every single aspect, every single time, Catholicism and Christianity in general evangelized to a culture that was, pagan or non-Christian, there was always this sense of give and take. I mean, in
Yeah.
the very early days of Christianity, the earliest apologists incorporated Greek philosophy into their arguments for God because Greek philosophy was like, kind of like this big thing back then. It
Right.
was the, pride of, Greek culture. And so the early apologists, used Greek philosophy in order to explain Christianity. And now, now that Greece is a Christian nation, they have the honor of, having this, having being the foundation of, Catholic philosophy. They have this honor of, they have this
Yeah.
contribution that's so insurmountable, that's so, irreplaceable to our Christian faith. And even like in early, in a more modern example is Mexico, they have Our Lady of Guadalupe. That's something that they provided to us. That's something that's, universal and it's all over the world. And I think that's, the pride of Mexico. That's the pride of Mexican Catholicism. And so even though like, Catholics, they were evangelized and they converted to, at what at the time was a foreign faith, they truly made that foreign faith into something of their own. And not only that, but they made it something their own and gave back to the church, which is why I think that it's such a point of pride for Mexicans. And so I guess like, those two examples really shows that when it comes to
Yeah, I mean,
interculturation,
as you spoke, I was thinking of my own country, Ireland, St. Patrick. He wasn't Irish himself, and he managed to convert the entire country to the faith by adapting the customs of the country, and he was a slave for 6 years. So he used that time to learn about the culture. And of course, St. Patrick is well known across the world as well for other reasons as well in terms of partying and so on. But still, yeah, he identified the beauty of the culture he was in. And you mentioned give and take. So I think the people of Ireland in his day warmed to him because he was very approachable and respected them.
yeah, absolutely. And and of course, like we celebrate St. Patrick's Day all over the world now. I mean, Irish Catholicism is something that, influenced the church as well. And so, I mean,
And Harry, I'm going to ask if anyone else has a question. I have one more question, but if there's anybody who'd like to ask a question, please just raise your hand, or there's a Q&A button there. You're more than welcome. St. Paul has just joined us. Welcome, Paul. I think he was at a retreat today, so thank you, Paul, for joining us. But if you do have a question, just let us know. Wave the hand or write a note on the Q&A card. And just my other question, Harry-san, is how do you think music can be combined with the art? Do you use sometimes music with your art? I think you do on Instagram, if I'm not mistaken. But how would you relate music, or would you?
I mean, I definitely would like to. I mean, I'm not really, I'm just an illustrator. I don't really have good, I'm not that good when it comes to composing music. I have tried before and it just wasn't great. But yeah, I mean, I do would love to incorporate music. There's a lot of like anime songs that I listen to, and I'm like, wow, like, yeah, if Mary sang that to me, I would like, I would never commit a sin anymore for the rest of my life. Yeah, it's kind of how I think about it.
Very good.
Yeah.
We actually do have a question from Paul. Welcome, Paul. And if you have any questions, please ask.
Yes, thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you.
Uh, I arrived from today's karaoke party from 15 minutes ago
Okay.
because it's very important. And as you mentioned right now, that the music is important. And more interested in me is that animation arts.
Yeah.
You know, I heard that Jesus Christ
Mm,
is a real human God
mm,
who was alive in the
yeah.
history,
Yeah.
but his resurrection is a supernatural phenomenon.
Mm,
Mhm.
So I heard the disciples and the Bible writers wrote about resurrection in an animation way, the
okay.
animation
Yeah.
arts.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about this comment? Do you think is it true or not? Please. Thank
I
you.
mean, yeah. Well, I mean, I do believe that since the resurrection and many of these miracles, they're truly supernatural. In a sense, I do believe that animation, which kind of distorts reality or like what we see in like the everyday world into something that's more whimsical, more fantastical. It definitely can convey the beauty and like the kind of like the glory of the resurrection and many of these other miracles in the way that more realistic styles of art or like film can't. And so yeah, I do believe that there's definitely some potential there. But of course, I'm not an animator yet, so that I don't really know how to do that. But I do think that it can be definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I like music and arts, and this kind of the arts is very interesting and attractive, and gives us the idea and the inspiration about the resurrection and supernatural phenomena in the Bible. So I'd like to learn more about art and music.
Great.
Yes, I love music. I'm a member of the English choir in St. Ignatius Church, and
Mhm.
today we enjoyed karaoke for 12 to 4 o'clock in Shinjuku. So I'm late, so sorry. But yes, I'd like to the power
Yeah.
of the art. I believe in the power of the art.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah. Next
much.
time you're going to karaoke, please let me know, okay?
Okay.
I
Yeah,
love
thank you.
karaoke too,
Okay,
so yeah,
sorry.
this is nice. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. I mean, iconography back in the day was actually a bone of contention between the Christian churches. One wanted it banned and the Catholic Church wanted to continue. So even still art in those days, iconography was quite controversial. Not, and they overcame the controversy, of course. But so throughout time, there's always been, I suppose, discussions and questions. It was very interesting comparison you made between the Byzantine art and the Renaissance art, and the interpretation you made from that is really great. And applying it to, as I say, the anime style that you're using is great. And of course, everybody, please take a look at Haruhi-san's Substack, and if there's any art that you like there, please go ahead and purchase. Just, is there anybody there? Anybody else would like to ask a question? Mio-san.
はい、じゃあ私いいですか。はい、私も、芸術的な人をすごい探してたので、すごい嬉しいです。実は何年か前、でも、春日さんは2年前からですか？アニメ描いたの。
いや、
もっと前じゃないですか。
5年前にち
え
ょっと始
え、
めましたけど、
え
真
え、
剣に勉強とか書いてないので、
え
まあ、
え、
そしてマリア様を書くのが2年前でし
あ、
た。デジ
そう
タルで
ですか。
書くのが、そしてもっと
うん、
本気でちゃんと勉強して、ちゃんと
うん、
習うのがその
うん。
2年前で
最
やり始め
近だったん
ました。
ですね。私、絶えざる御助の聖母のマリア様の関係で、ロジェ神父様って、神父様と一緒にちょっとミッションしてた時に、絶えざる御助のマリア様のアニメのやつを見つけて、でも誰が書いたかわからなくて、でもすごい気に入ってたんですね、私も神父様も。それをぜひ皆さんに紹介したかったんですけど、ちょっと名前がわからなくて、使うことも紹介することもできず、すごい、残念だったんですよね。でも、もしかしてこれ、春日さんの作品だったのかなとか思ったんですけど、でも前からやっぱりこのクリエイター、要するに創造主である神と私たちは同じようなものをいただいてるから、想像することはすごい楽しいですよね。で、特に春日さんのようにアニメを描かれるっていうのは、やっぱりこの賜物、私たちみんないろんな賜物もらってますけど、その賜物を通して、神を賛美する、神の栄光のために、そして福音宣教は私たちの仕事ですから、それに携われるって、特にこの日本の文化、30年ぐらい前からですけど、日本の文化、アニメって言われるようになったのは、もう本当に30年ぐらい前からなんですけど、
うん。
本当に世界の人が日本のアニメがもうとにかくナンバーワンなんですよね。どこ行っ
そう、
ても。
まあ、
で、実は昨年ですね、天正使節団お分かりだと思いますけど、日本からイタリアに行った天正使節団、4人の使節団たち、そのうちの1人が中村ジュリアンですけど、その彼らが初めて日本から出て、イタリアとかに行ったんですが、440年だったんですよ。で、それを記
うん。
念してちょっとイベントをやろうということで、彼らが立ち寄ったロレートで、サンタカーザのあるロレートで、私もちょっと企画をしてですね、日本の、文化っていうことでお茶、お花着付け、歌とか、歌も歌ったんですけど、でも本当はそこにアニメを持っていきたかったんですけど、誰もいなくてですね、そのアニメができる人とか。でもやっぱ老若男女待ってるのはアニメなんですよ。日本の文化イコール、今やもうお茶とかお花剣道とかじゃなくてアニメなんですよね。それでもうどっかにいないかなと思ってすごい探してたんですけど、この度、ニルさんが見つけていただいて、ぜひともですね、春日さんには日本の代表で、日本の文化で宣教していただきたいと思っています。で、そしてさらに日本でです ね。やっぱり聖書のこととかを伝えるときに文字で見ろって言ったって誰も見ないわけですよ。でも、たくさんの聖書には、いろんな話がありますから、やっぱりそれを、アニメにね、していただくと、本当によくわかるし、非常に面白いし、これで聖書のことが分かったらすごいいいじゃないですか。それにも
うん、そうですね、
ついには、
確かに。
ぜひやっていただきたい。声優やりますから、私。
いや、なんかその、アニメをなんか作るのがちょっと難しいかもしれませんね。なんか
いや、祈ってれば、
今自分でやっていますので、
あ、
なんか自
そうですね。
分でなんかその30
うん、
分ぐらいのなんかアニメをなんか
そう
作るのがちょっ
ですね。
と無理か
うんうんうん。
もしれませんけど。
でも祈ってれば協力者が出てくると思うし、動くものじゃなくても絵を次々変えていくっていう風にしてもいいんじゃないかな。まあ YouTube とかでもできるし、まあいろ
うん。
んな方法、YouTube だったら世界の人たちみんな見てるし、まあインスタでもそうですけれど、まあとにかく発信することで皆さんが興味持ってくれれば、神にね、近づいてくれる。で、マリア様に近づいてくれる。あと、聖人、まあもちろん日本にはないんですけど、イタリアとかにあるのは、やっぱり聖人のお話をアニメでやってるんですね。だからそう
うん。
いうのもね、作られると、もっと聖人と近くなる。で、先ほどおっしゃってたように、そのアニメが何の役に立つかっていうのは、やっぱりこう、昔の、それこそ、本当に大昔からの名画はいっぱいありますけど、やっぱり今は今の時代のアニメっていう手法を使って、聖人とか神とかマリア様ともっと親しく近く、遠いものじゃなくて近いものとして紹
うん。
介することができるので、すごいこれはカリスマだと思いますね。これを活かしてみんなを神に近づかせるっていう、すごいこれは日本人だけじゃなくて世界の人にそれをアニメを使って宣教することができるので、もうもっともっとこれから活かすことができると思いますんで、楽しみにしてます。ぜひぜひ、
ありがとうございます。すいません。ちょっと
ぜひ、
なんか、
やってみて。はい、
堀さんになんか言ったことにちょっとなんかコメントしたいんですけ
はい、
ど、
はい、はい、
大丈夫ですか？なん
はい、はい、
か、えっと、前になんかその成人をなんか近づけるというなんかものですけど、
はい、
その
はい、
中でなんか日
うん、
本人のなんか成
うん、
人っていうのは、まあ
はい。
日本のなんか出身の成人がいると思いますね。
まあ、
なん
い
ていうか、
ますよ。はい、
まあなん
はい。
かヨーロッパもなんかほとんどなんかその成人はなんかヨーロッパの出身ですけど、
ああ、はは
まあなん
はは。
か日本ではね、なんか400、500年前のなんかそのカトリックの歴史
はは。
とか、なんか
はい、
伝統がありますの
はい、
で、
はい、はい、は
まあ、
い。
私はなんか前にもうまだなんかそのことについてなんかイラストをなんか
うん。
描いてないんですけど、
あは
まあ、
はい。
この後で
うん、
やっぱりなんかもっと日本人のなんか成人
ぜひやって
とか
ください。いっぱい
日
聖人い
本のカト
ますから、
リックの
日本の。
そうですね。
はい。
まあ一番なんか好みのなんか成人は実はなんか長崎のマグダレーナ、長崎の聖マグダレーナ。
Margarina,
うー
yeah, so
ん。
まあ、その、
Nagasaki,
あの、
the 26 martyrs, Paul
あ
Miki,
の中には入ってないですよ。多分188人のじゃないですか。
いや、そうですね。
あと、
180、
188人の連
26
邦
の成人の中ではないんですけ
じゃない、
ど、
26ではないです。マグダレナはでも京都じゃなかったですか？お母さんと子供2人ですよね。
すいません。そんなに詳しくない。
あ、
なんか、
詳しくない。もしくは、長崎かな。ですね、私もちょっと行ってきたんですけど、北有馬のところで、やっぱりその殉教があったんですよね。で、そ
うん、
こでもマグダレナだったかな。お母さんと子供2人、十字架に火炙りにされて、殺されてるんですけど、
うん、
その人が、
Magdalena's
い
Nagasaki,
ま
right?
す。はい。長
It's
崎かな。
Nagasaki,
はい。
yeah.
まあ、
うん、
Saint
長崎、
Magdalena of
雲仙な。
Nagasaki.
ああ、そうかな。はい。まあ、その人もいるし、ただ、その人の場合とかだったら、その生涯とかがやっぱりちょっとわからないじゃないですか。ヒストリーがわからない。最後だけわかる。だから、まあ、それはそれでもいいですけど、ヒストリーがわかる人をやってもいいかとは思うんですよね。まあ、例
うん、
えば日本にいらっしゃ、まあ、永井隆さんの本とか読むとわかるんですけど、乙女峠ってあるんですけど、島根県の津和野ですね。で、あそこの話とかもすごくいいと思います。やっぱり彼らが殉教するにあたって、殉教を迫害されてて、拷問されてる間に、何人かの人が穴を掘って地下から外に出て、津和野から京都まで歩いていくんですね。で、
う
京都の
ん、
司教様のところに自分たちが迫害されてることを全部伝えるんですね。そして
うん、
そこで司教様からメダイとか十字架とかもらって、ロザリオも らって、また戻ってきて拷問を受けて殉教するんですね。でも彼らの証言によって、実は日本には、キリスト教、要するに信教の自由がもたらされたんですね。やっぱりそういう歴史的にも実際関わっていることとかを、アニメにするとすごくいいと思います。あと、例えばオタ・ジュリアにしてもそうだし、特に、乙女峠の殉教者たちは、おかげで、やっぱり私たちは今、宗教の自由があるんですね。それをもっとね、知らせるべきだと思います。だからもっと日本のその殉教者たちのこととか、そして先ほど言った中浦ジュリアンもそうですけど、天正使節団として4人が、20人ぐらい他の人もいたんですけど、イタリアに、そうですね、で、イタリア行って戻ってきて、で、結局最後に殉教したのは中浦ジュリアンですけど、彼は、私はローマを見た中浦ジュリアンだって言って、殉教するんですね。ですから、やっぱり中浦ジュリアンだけじゃなくて、他のガスペルとかもいろいろいますけれども、そういう方たちの、日本の殉教者たちのアニメも、チールス神父様の本とかも参考にされて作られるとすごくいいと思いますよ。
ありがとうございます。なんかす
お
ごく詳しいですね。
願いします。
なんか日本の歴史、
ぜひぜひ。
クリスチャンの歴史はすごいです。素晴
そうですね。
らしいです。
日本のキリスト者として自分のキリスト教のカトリックのヒストリーもちゃんと知らないとダメだと思います。外にばっかり目行く前に、まず自分たちのことをね、どういう人たちが血潮でね、私たちのために血を流してくれてるかって、殉教者の血は新しい信者の種ですから、私たちもその方たちの祈りと犠牲があって初めて神を知ることができるので、やっぱり今度知った私たちは新しい人たちに知らせなきゃいけない。これ仕事ですから、使命ですから、じゃあその時に春日さんはアニメだし、そしてニールさんはまたウェブだしとか、できるものを通して神からいただいているそのカリスマをね、使って、いかに神のことを伝えるか、これは私たちの仕事なんで、それをね、ぜひお互い協力しながらもっと豊かにしていけると思いますんで、ぜひこれからも頑張っていきましょう。
Just what you're
頑張ります。
saying there too, Harry-san, is there's another female saint who's martyred around the same time as Saint Magdalena. Her name is Saint Marina of Omura.
そうです。
Yeah, she was only
そうですね。
22,
はい。
and so was Saint Magdalena. But I would recommend, if you're interested, you should. I'm amazed by those two saints in particular because they were only 22. And I mean, today, if you look with the way things are, can be in the world today, but they sacrificed. I mean, they offered themselves in sacrifice, and they're only 22. But there's great artistic work that's available, and Catholic artistic work about those two particular saints, and they're only 22. So Saint Marina of Omura. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that
大村
correctly,
の。
but
はい。
definitely worth taking a look into in terms if you're looking for ideas or inspiration. So we are quickly approaching our last moments or last seconds. Harry-san is probably busy, and other people maybe want to have dinner or tea or whatever. So unless there's any other questions, I think we will. And by the way, Harry-san, there's going to be probably more conferences, Marian conferences. We're working on something special with Rome, and nothing's fixed. But the part of that would be to have an artistic element as part of the conference. And it actually in Rome. Remember, Miho-san, 去年9月なんか
はい。
音楽
ちょっとご案内しますね。はい。実は、はい。私と、ニールさんはマリオロジーですね。ポンティフィーチョ、マリオロジアって言いまして、教皇庁のマリア論のセクションがあって、今日はその中から2人の神父様が出てくださったんですけど、実はローマで4年に一度国際会議がありまして、それでニールさんと私は参加してきたんですね。で、そこで初めてそのアートの部分をステファン神父様が作ったんですけど、音楽とダンスと絵とっていうセクションを作って、なんと一等賞になった人には1000ユーロでしたか、1万ユーロ、100万ユーロ、すごいユーロがプレゼントされていまして、次はブラジルなんですね。ブラジルでやります。春日さん出してください。
実はなんか ブラジルの出版社からその連絡が来たので、僕は、
そうなん
そう、すごいで
ですか。
すね。本当
まあ、
に。はい。
出しといてください、じゃあ。
はいはいはい。
そして私はそのステファノ神父様と、教皇庁の長官なんですけど、いつもやり取りしておりますので、すごく日本に対して興味があるんですね。そして日本では何かやらないのかってこう言ってくれたったので、探してますっていう感じだったので、今、アルヒさんを見つけたので、これでいけるぞって感じなんですけどね、楽しみにしております。でも本当に隠さずね、こういろいろとアクションを出していただいたらいいと思います。そして、今申し上げましたように4年に1回マリオロジーの、国際会議があって、次の3年後が、4年後ですか、がブラジルでやるんですけど、それ以外の毎年はいろんな国でやってますっていうことで、今年
うん。
も去年も、今年ですね、今年になってからもイタリアの各地でやってたりもしてますし、そして、日本でもやることができるので、準備さえできればやってって、僕たち行くからって教皇庁からも言われてるので、ぜひ皆さんでね、日程が決まったら盛り上げていただきたいなと思いますので、ダンスでも歌でも絵でも何でも大丈夫です。芸術的なものを通して、神を賛美しましょう、マリア様を賛美しましょうっていうセクションが、ステファン神父様作られましたので、ぜひ日本人の方もね、積極的に参加していただければなと思っております。はい。
Yes. So once again, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you so much, Haruhi-san, for a wonderful presentation, and I hope we keep in touch, and we hope that your work will continue to blossom and to grow, and we look forward to seeing your new productions over time.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Neil, and thank you so much, Tori, for hosting, and for Neil as well. Yeah, thank you so much. It was a blessing to present in this Marian conference. まあ、発表をご覧いただき誠にありがとうございました。